Section 31 of Emily of New Moon by Lucy M. Montgomery. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune, Section 31. It took Emily several weeks to make up her mind whether she liked Mr. Carpenter or not. She knew she did not dislike him, not even though his first greeting shot at her on the opening day of school in a gruff voice, accompanied by a startling lift of his spiky grey brows, was, "So you're the girl that writes poetry, eh? Better stick to your needle and duster. Too many fools in the world trying to write poetry and failing. I tried it myself once, got better sense now." "You don't keep your nails clean," thought Emily. But he upset every kind of school tradition so speedily and thoroughly that Ilse, who gloried in upsetting things and hated routine, was the only scholar that liked him from the start. Some never liked him, the Rhoda Stewart type, for example, but most of them came to it after they got used to never being used to anything, and Emily finally decided that she liked him tremendously. Mr. Carpenter was somewhere between 40 and 50, a tall man with an upstanding shock of bushy grey hair, bristling grey moustache and eyebrows, a truculent beard, bright blue eyes, out of which all his wild life had not yet burned the fire, and a long, lean, greyish face, deeply lined. He lived in a little two-roomed house below the school, with a shy mouse of a wife. He never talked of his past, or offered any explanation of the fact that at his age he had no better profession than teaching a district school for a pittance of salary. But the truth leaked out after a while, for Prince Edward Island is a small province and everybody in it knows something about everybody else. So eventually Blairwater people, and even the school children, understood that Mr. Carpenter had been a brilliant student in his youth and had had his eye on the ministry, but at college he had got in with a fast set. Blairwater people nodded heads slowly and whispered the dreadful phrase portentously, and the fast set had ruined him. He took to drink and went to the dogs generally. And the upshot of it all was that Francis Carpenter, who had led his class in his first and second years at McGill, and for whom his teachers had predicted a great career, was a country school teacher at 45, with no prospect of ever being anything else. Perhaps he was resigned to it, perhaps not. Nobody ever knew, not even the brown mouse of a wife. Nobody in Blairwater cared. He was a good teacher, and that was all that mattered. Even if he did go on occasional sprees, he always took Saturday for them, and was sober enough by Monday. Sober and especially dignified, wearing a rusty black frock coat, which he never put on any other day of the week. He did not invite pity, and he did not pose as a tragedy. But sometimes, when Emily looked at his face, bent over the arithmetic problems of Blairwater School, she felt horribly sorry for him, without in the least understanding why. He had an explosive temper, which generally burst into flame at least once a day, and then he would storm about wildly for a few minutes, tugging at his beard, imploring heaven to grant him patience, abusing everybody in general and the luckless object of his wrath in particular. But these tempers never lasted long. In a few minutes Mr. Carpenter would be smiling as graciously as a sun bursting through a storm cloud on the very pupil he had been rating. Nobody seemed to cherish any grudge because of his scoldings. He never said any of the biting things Miss Brownell was wont to say, which rankled and festered for weeks. His hail of words fell alike on just and unjust, and rolled off harmlessly. He could take a joke on himself in perfect good nature. "Do you hear me? Do you hear me, sirrah?" he bellowed to Perry Miller one day. "Of course I hear you," retorted Perry coolly. "They could hear you in Charlottetown." Mr. Carpenter stared for a moment, then broke into a great jolly laugh. His methods of teaching were so different from Miss Brownell's that the Blairwater pupils at first felt as if he had stood them on their heads. Miss Brownell had been a martinet for order. Mr. Carpenter never tried to keep order, apparently, but somehow he kept the children so busy that they had no time to do mischief. He taught history tempestuously for a month, making his pupils play the different characters and enact the incidents. He never bothered anyone to learn dates, but the dates stuck in the memory just the same. If, as Mary Queen of Scots, you were beheaded by the school axe, kneeling blindfolded at the doorstep, with Perry Miller, wearing a mask made out of a piece of Aunt Laura's old black silk for executioner, wondering what would happen if he brought the axe down too hard, you did not forget the year it happened, and if you fought the Battle of Waterloo all over the school playground, and heard Teddy Kent shouting, "Up, guards, and at him!" as he led the last furious charge, you remembered 1815 without half trying to. Next month history would be thrust aside altogether, and geography would take its place. When school and playground were mapped out into countries, and you dressed up as the animals inhabiting them, or traded in various commodities over their rivers and cities. When Rhoda Stewart had cheated you in a bargain in hides, you remembered that she had bought the cargo from the Argentine Republic, and when Perry Miller would not drink any water for a whole hot summer day, because he was crossing the Arabian desert with a caravan of camels, and could not find an oasis, and then drank so much that he took terrible cramps, and Aunt Laura had to be up all night with him, you did not forget where the said desert was. The trustees were quite scandalized over some of the goings-on, and felt sure that the children were having too good a time to be really learning anything. If you wanted to learn Latin and French, you had to do it by talking your exercises, not writing them. And on Friday afternoons all lessons were put aside, and Mr. Carpenter made the children recite poems, make speeches, and declaim passages from Shakespeare and the Bible. This was the day Ilse loved. Mr. Carpenter pounced on her gift like a starving dog on a bone, and drilled her without mercy. They had endless fights, and Ilse stamped her foot and called him names, while the other pupils wondered why she was not punished for it, but at last had to give in and do as he willed. Ilse went to school regularly, something she had never done before. Mr. Carpenter had told her that if she were absent for a day without good excuse, she would take no part in the Friday exercises, and this would have killed her. One day Mr. Carpenter had picked up Teddy's slate and found a sketch of himself on it, in one of his favorite, if not exactly beautiful attitudes. Teddy had labeled it the Black Death, half of the pupils of the school having died that day of the Great Plague, and having been carried out on stretchers to the potter's field by the terrified survivors. Teddy expected a roar of denunciation, for the day before Garrett Marshall had been ground into figurative pulp on being discovered with the picture of a harmless cow on his slate. At least, Garrett said he meant it for a cow, but now this amazing Mr. Carpenter only drew his beetling brows together, looked earnestly at Teddy's slate, put it down on the desk, looked at Teddy and said, "I don't know anything about drawing. I can't help you, but by gad, I think hereafter you'd better give up those extra arithmetic problems in the afternoon and draw pictures." Whereupon Garrett Marshall went home and told his father that old Carpenter wasn't fair and made favorites over Teddy Kent. Mr. Carpenter went up to the tansy patch that evening and saw the sketches in Teddy's old barn-loft studio. Then he went into the house and talked to Mrs. Kent. What he said and what she said Nobody ever knew. But Mr. Carpenter went away looking grim, as if he had met an unexpected match. He took great pains with Teddy's general schoolwork after that, and procured from somewhere certain elementary textbooks on drawing, which he gave him, telling him not to take them home, a caution Teddy did not require. He knew quite well that if he did they would disappear as mysteriously as his cats had done. He had taken Emily's advice, and told his mother he would not love her if anything happened to Leo, and Leo flourished and waxed fat and doggy. But Teddy was too gentle at heart, and too fond of his mother to make such a threat more than once. He knew she had cried all that night, after Mr. Carpenter had been there, and prayed on her knees in her little bedroom most of the next day, and looked at him with bitter, haunting eyes for a week. He wished she were more like other fellows' mothers, but they loved each other very much, and had dear hours together in the little grey house on the Tansy Hill. It was only when other people were about that Mrs. Kent was queer and jealous. "She's always lovely when we're alone," Teddy had told Emily. As for the other boys, Perry Miller was the only one Mr. Carpenter bothered much with, in the way of speeches, and he was as merciless with him as with Ilse. Perry worked hard to please him, and practised his speeches in barn and field, and even by nights in the kitchen loft, until Aunt Elizabeth put a stop to that. Emily could not understand why Mr. Carpenter would smile amiably and say, "Very good," when Neddy Gray rattled off a speech glibly, without any expression whatever, and then rage at Perry and denounce him as a dunce and a nincompoop, by gad, because he had failed to give just the proper emphasis on a certain word, or had timed his gesture a fraction of a second too soon. Neither could she understand why he made red pencil corrections all over her compositions, and rated her for split infinitives and too lavish adjectives, and strode up and down the aisle and hurled objurgations at her because she didn't know a good place to stop when she saw it, by gad, and then told Rhoda Stewart and Nan Lee that their compositions were very pretty, and gave them back without so much as a mark on them. Yet in spite of it all, she liked him more and more as time went on, and autumn passed, and winter came with its beautiful bare-limbed trees, and soft pearl-grey skies that were slashed with rifts of gold in the afternoons, and cleared to a jewelled pageantry of stars over the wide white hills and valleys around New Moon. Emily shot up so that winter that Aunt Laura had to let down the tucks in her dresses. Aunt Ruth, who had come for a week's visit, said she was outgrowing her strength. Consumptive children always did. "I am not consumptive," Emily said. "The stars are tall," she added with a touch of subtle malice, hardly to be looked for when near 13. Aunt Ruth, who was sensitive in regard to her dumpiness, sniffed. "It would be well if that were the only thing in which you resemble them," she said. "How are you getting on in school?" "Very well. I am the smartest scholar in my class," answered Emily composedly. "You conceited child," said Aunt Ruth. "I'm not conceited." Emily looked scornful indignation. "Mr. Carpenter said it, and he doesn't flatter. Besides, I can't help seeing it myself." "Well, it is to be hoped you have some brains, because you haven't much in the way of looks," said Aunt Ruth. "You've no complexion to speak of, and that inky hair around your white face is startling. I see you are going to be a plain girl." "You wouldn't say that to a grown-up person's face," said Emily with a deliberate gravity which always exasperated Aunt Ruth, because she could not understand it in a child. "I don't think it would hurt you to be as polite to me as you are to other people." "I'm telling you your faults so you may correct them," said Aunt Ruth frigidly. "It isn't my fault that my face is pale and my hair black," protested Emily. "I can't correct that." "If you were a different girl," said Aunt Ruth, "I would—" "But I don't want to be a different girl," said Emily decidedly. She had no intention of lowering the star flag to Aunt Ruth. "I wouldn't want to be anybody but myself, even if I am plain. Besides," she added impressively, as she turned to go out of the room, "though I may not be very good looking now, when I go to heaven I believe I'll be very beautiful." "Some people think Emily quite pretty," said Aunt Laura, but she did not say it until Emily was out of hearing. She was Murray enough for that. "I don't know where they see it," said Aunt Ruth. "She's vain and pert, and says things to be thought smart. You heard her just now. But the thing I dislike most in her is that she is unchildlike, and deep as the sea. Yes, she is, Laura, deep as the sea. You'll find it out to your cost one day if you disregard my warning. She's capable of anything. Sly is no word for it. You and Elizabeth don't keep a tight enough rein over her." "I've done my best," said Elizabeth stiffly. She herself did think she had been much too lenient with Emily. Laura and Jimmy were 2 to 1, but it nettled her to have Ruth say so. Uncle Wallace also had an attack of worrying over Emily that winter. He looked at her one day when he was at New Moon, and remarked that she was getting to be a big girl. "How old are you, Emily?" he asked her that every time he came to New Moon. 13 in May. What are you going to do with her, Elizabeth?" "I don't know what you mean," said Aunt Elizabeth coldly, or as coldly as is possible to speak when one is pouring melted tallow into candle moulds. "Why, she'll soon be grown up. She can't expect you to provide for her indefinitely." "I don't," Emily whispered resentfully under her breath. "And it's time we decided what is best to be done for her." "The Murray women have never had to work out for a living," said Aunt Elizabeth, as if that disposed of the matter. "Emily is only half Murray," said Wallace. "Besides, times are changing. You and Laura will not live forever, Elizabeth, and when you are gone New Moon goes to Oliver's Andrew. In my opinion, Emily should be fitted to support herself if necessary." Emily did not like Uncle Wallace, but she was very grateful to him at that moment. Whatever his motives were, he was proposing the very thing she secretly yearned for. "I would suggest," said Uncle Wallace, "that she be sent to Queen's Academy to get a teacher's license. Teaching is a genteel, ladylike occupation. I will do my share in providing for the expense of it." A blind person might have seen that Uncle Wallace thought this very splendid of himself. "If you do," thought Emily, "I'll pay every cent back to you as soon as I'm able to earn it." But Aunt Elizabeth was adamant. "I do not believe in girls going out into the world," she said. "I don't mean Emily to go to Queen's. I told Mr. Carpenter so when he came to see me about her taking up the entrance work. He was very rude. School teachers knew their place better in my father's time, but I made him understand, I think. I'm rather surprised at you, Wallace. You did not send your own daughter out to work." "My daughter had parents to provide for her," retorted Uncle Wallace pompously. "Emily is an orphan. I imagined from what I had heard about her that she would prefer earning her own living to living on charity." "So I would," cried out Emily. "So I would, Uncle Wallace. Oh, Aunt Elizabeth, please let me study for the entrance. Please. I'll pay you back every cent you spend on it. I will indeed. I pledge you my word of honor." "It does not happen to be a question of money," said Aunt Elizabeth in her stateliest manner. "I undertook to provide for you, Emily, and I will do it. When you are older, I may send you to the high school in Shrewsbury for a couple of years. I am not decrying education, but you are not going to be a slave to the public. No Murray girl ever was that. Emily, realizing the uselessness of pleading, went out in the same bitter disappointment she had felt after Mr. Carpenter's visit. Then Aunt Elizabeth looked at Wallace. "Have you forgotten what came of sending Juliet to Queen's?" she asked significantly. If Emily was not allowed to take up the entrance classes, Perry had no one to say him nay, and he went at them with the same dogged determination he showed in all other matters. Perry's status at New Moon had changed subtly and steadily. Aunt Elizabeth had ceased to refer scornfully to him as a hired boy. Even she recognized that though he was still indubitably a hired boy, he was not going to remain one, and she no longer objected to Laura's patching up his ragged bits of clothing, or to Emily's helping him with his lessons in the kitchen after supper, nor did she growl when Cousin Jimmy began to pay him a certain small wage, though older boys than Perry were still glad to put in the winter months choring for board and lodging in some comfortable home. If a future premier was in the making at New Moon, Aunt Elizabeth wanted to have some small share in the making. It was credible and commendable that a boy should have ambitions. A girl was an entirely different matter. A girl's place was at home. Emily helped Perry work out algebra problems, and heard his lessons in French and Latin. She picked up more thus than Aunt Elizabeth would have approved, and more still when the entrance pupils talked those languages in school. It was quite an easy matter for a girl who had once upon a time invented a language of her own. When George Bates, by way of showing off, asked her one day in French, his French, of which Mr. Carpenter had once said doubtfully that perhaps God might understand it, "Have you the ink of my grandmother and the shoe-brush of my cousin and the umbrella of my aunt's husband in your desk?" Emily retorted quite as glibly and quite as Frenchily, "No, but I have the pen of your father and the cheese of the innkeeper and the towel of your uncle's maid-servant in my basket." To console herself for her disappointment in regard to the entrance class, Emily wrote more poetry than ever. It was especially delightful to write poetry on a winter evening, when the storm winds howled without and heaped the garden and orchard with big ghostly drifts, starred over with rabbits' candles. She also wrote several stories, desperate love affairs wherein she struggled heroically against the difficulties of affectionate dialogue, tales of bandits and pirates. Emily liked these because there was no necessity for bandits and pirates to converse lovingly. Tragedies of earls and countesses, whose conversation she dearly loved to pepper with scraps of French, and a dozen other subjects she didn't know anything about. She also meditated beginning a novel, but decided it would be too hard to get enough paper for it. The letter bills were all done now, and the Jimmy books were not big enough, though a new one always appeared mysteriously in her school basket when the old one was almost full. Cousin Jimmy seemed to have an uncanny prescience of the proper time. That was part of his Jimminess. Then one night, as she lay in her lookout bed and watched a full moon gleaming lustrously from a cloudless sky across the valley, she had a sudden dazzling idea. She would send her latest poem to the Charlottetown Enterprise. The Enterprise had a poet's corner where original verses were frequently printed. Privately, Emily thought her own were quite as good, as probably they were, for most of the Enterprise poems were sad trash. Emily was so excited over the idea that she could not sleep for the greater part of the night, and didn't want to. It was glorious to lie there thrilling in the darkness and picture the whole thing out. She saw her verses in print, signed E. Bird Star. She saw Aunt Laura's eyes shining with pride. She saw Mr. Carpenter pointing them out to strangers. "The work of a pupil of mine, by gad!" She saw all her schoolmates envying her or admiring according to type. She saw herself with one foot at least firmly planted on the ladder of fame, one hill at least of the Alpine path crested, with a new and glorious prospect opening therefrom. Morning came. Emily went to school, so absent-minded because of her secret that she did badly in everything, and was raged at by Mr. Carpenter, but it all slipped off her like the proverbial water off a duck's back. Her body was in Blairwater School, but her spirit was in kingdoms imperial. As soon as school was out, she betook herself to the garret, with half a sheet of blue-lined notepaper. Very painstakingly she copied down the poem, being especially careful to dot every I and cross every T. She wrote it on both sides of the paper, being in blissful ignorance of any taboo thereon. Then she read it aloud delightedly, not omitting the title Evening Dreams. There was one line in it she tasted 2 or 3 times, the haunting elfin music of the air. "I think that line is very good," said Emily. "I wonder now how I happened to think of it." She mailed her poem the next day, and lived in a delicious mystic rapture until the following Saturday. When the Enterprise came, she opened it with tremulous eagerness and ice-cold fingers, and turned to the Poet's Corner. Now for her great moment. There was not a sign of an evening dream about it. Emily threw down the Enterprise and fled to the garret dormer, where, face downward on the old haircloth sofa, she wept out her bitterness of disappointment. She drained the draught of failure to the very dregs. It was horribly real and tragic to her. She felt exactly as if she had been slapped in the face. She was crushed in the very dust of humiliation, and was sure she could never rise again. How thankful she was that she hadn't told Teddy anything about it. She had been so strongly tempted to, and only refrained because she didn't want to spoil the dramatic surprise of the moment when she would show him the verses with her name signed to them. She had told Perry, and Perry was furious when he saw her tear-stained face later on in the dairy as they strained the milk together. Ordinarily Emily loved this, but to-night the savour had gone out of the world. Even the milky splendour of the still mild winter evening, and the purple bloom over the hillside woods that presaged a thaw, could not give her the accustomed soul thrill. "I'm going to Charlottetown if I have to walk, and I'll bust that Enterprise editor's head," said Perry, with the expression which, 30 years later, warned the members of his party to scatter for cover. "That wouldn't be any use," said Emily drearily. "He didn't think it good enough to print. That is what hurts me so, Perry. He didn't think it any good. Busting his head wouldn't change that." It took her a week to recover from the blow. Then she wrote a story in which the editor of the Enterprise played the part of a dark and desperate villain who found lodging eventually behind prison bars. This got the venom out of her system, and she forgot all about him in the delight of writing a poem addressed to "Sweet Lady April." But I question if she ever really forgave him, even when she discovered eventually that you must not write on both sides of the paper. Even when she read over Evening Dreams a year later and wondered how she could ever have thought it any good. This sort of thing was happening frequently now. Every time she read her little hoard of manuscripts over, she found some of which the fairy gold had unaccountably turned to withered leaves, fit only for the burning. Emily burned them, but it hurt her a little. Outgrowing things we love is never a pleasant process. End of section 31. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 32 of Emily of New Moon by Lucy M. Montgomery. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 32. There had been several clashes between Aunt Elizabeth and Emily that winter and spring. Generally, Aunt Elizabeth came out victorious, There was that in her that would not be denied, the satisfaction of having her own way, even in trifling matters. But once in a while she came up against that curious streak of granite in Emily's composition which was unyielding and unbendable and unbreakable. Mary Murray of 100 years agone had been, so family chronicle ran, a gentle and submissive creature generally, but she had that same streak in her, as her "Here I stay" abundantly testified. When Aunt Elizabeth tried conclusions with that element in Emily, she always got the worst of it. Yet she did not learn wisdom therefrom, but pursued her policy of repression all the more rigorously. For it occasionally came home to her, as Laura let down tucks, that Emily was on the verge of beginning to grow up, and that various breakers and reefs loomed ahead, ominously magnified in the midst of unseen years. Emily must not be allowed to get out of hand now, lest later on she make shipwreck as her mother had done, or as Elizabeth Murray firmly believed she had done. There were, in short, to be no more elopements from New Moon. One of the things they fell out about was the fact that Emily, as Aunt Elizabeth discovered one day, was in the habit of using more of her egg money to buy paper than Aunt Elizabeth approved of. What did Emily do with so much paper? They had a fuss over this, and eventually Aunt Elizabeth discovered that Emily was writing stories. Emily had been writing stories all winter under Aunt Elizabeth's very nose, and Aunt Elizabeth had never suspected it. She had fondly supposed that Emily was writing school compositions. Aunt Elizabeth knew in a vague way that Emily wrote silly rhymes which she called poetry, but this did not worry her especially. Jimmy made up a lot of similar trash. It was foolish but harmless, and Emily would doubtless outgrow it. Jimmy had not outgrown it, to be sure, but then his accident — Elizabeth always went a little sick in soul when she remembered it — had made him more or less a child for life. But writing stories was a very different thing, and Aunt Elizabeth was horrified. Fiction of any kind was an abominable thing. Elizabeth Murray had been trained up in this belief in her youth, and in her age she had not departed from it. She honestly thought that it was a wicked and sinful thing in any one to play cards, dance, or go to the theatre, read or write novels, and in Emily's case there was a worse feature. It was the star coming out in her, Douglas Star especially. No Murray of New Moon had ever been guilty of writing stories, or of ever wanting to write them. It was an alien growth that must be pruned off ruthlessly. Aunt Elizabeth applied the pruning shears, and found no pliant snippable root but that same underlying streak of granite. Emily was respectful and reasonable and above board. She bought no more paper with egg money, but she told Aunt Elizabeth that she could not give up writing stories, and she went right on writing them, on pieces of brown wrapping paper and the blank backs of circulars which agricultural machinery firms sent Cousin Jimmy. "Don't you know that it is wicked to write novels?" demanded Aunt Elizabeth. "Oh, I'm not writing novels yet," said Emily. "I can't get enough paper. These are just short stories, and it isn't wicked. Father liked novels." "Your father—" began Aunt Elizabeth, and stopped. She remembered that Emily had acted up before now when anything derogatory was said of her father, but the very fact that she felt mysteriously compelled to stop annoyed Elizabeth, who had said what seemed good to her all her life at New Moon, without much regard for other people's feelings. "You will not write any more of this stuff," Aunt Elizabeth
contemptuously flourished the secret of the castle under Emily's nose. "I forbid you! Remember, I forbid you!" "Oh, I must write, Aunt Elizabeth," said Emily gravely, folding her slender, beautiful hands on the table and looking straight into Aunt Elizabeth's angry face with the steady, unblinking gaze which Aunt Ruth called unchildlike. "You see, it's this way. It is in me. I can't help it. And father said I was always to keep on writing. He said I would be famous some day. Wouldn't you like to have a famous niece, Aunt Elizabeth?" "I am not going to argue the matter," said Aunt Elizabeth. "I'm not arguing, only explaining." Emily was exasperatingly respectful. "I just want you to understand how it is that I have to go on writing stories, even though I am so very sorry you don't approve. If you don't give up this worse than nonsense, Emily, I'll Aunt Elizabeth stopped, not knowing what to say she would do. Emily was too big now to be slapped or shut up, and it was no use to say, as she was tempted to, "I'll send you away from New Moon," because Elizabeth Murray knew perfectly well she would not send Emily away from New Moon, could not send her away, indeed, though this knowledge was as yet only in her feelings, and had not been translated into her intellect. She only felt that she was helpless, and it angered her. But Emily was mistress of the situation, and calmly went on writing stories. If Aunt Elizabeth had asked her to give up crocheting lace, or making molasses taffy, or eating Aunt Laura's delicious drop cookies, Emily would have done so, wholly and cheerfully, though she loved these things. But to give up writing stories, why, Aunt Elizabeth might as well have asked her to give up breathing. Why couldn't she understand? It seemed so simple and indisputable to Emily. Teddy can't help making pictures, and Ilse can't help reciting, and I can't help writing. Don't you see, Aunt Elizabeth? "I see that you are an ungrateful and disobedient child," said Aunt Elizabeth. This hurt Emily horribly, but she could not give in, and there continued to be a sense of soreness and disapproval between her and Aunt Elizabeth in all the little details of daily life that poisoned existence more or less for the child, who was so keenly sensitive to her environment and to the feelings with which her kindred regarded her. Emily felt it all the time, except when she was writing her stories. Then she forgot everything, roaming in some enchanted country between the sun and moon, where she saw wonderful beings whom she tried to describe, and wonderful deeds which she tried to record, coming back to the candle-lit kitchen with a somewhat dazed sense of having been years in no man's land. She did not even have Aunt Laura to back her up in the matter. Aunt Laura thought Emily ought to yield in such an unimportant matter and please Aunt Elizabeth. "But it's not unimportant," said Emily despairingly. "It's the most important thing in the world to me, Aunt Laura. Oh, I thought you would understand." "I understand that you like to do it, dear, and I think it's a harmless enough amusement. But it seems to annoy Elizabeth some way, and I do think you might give it up on that account. It is not as if it was anything that mattered much. It is really a waste of time." "No, no," said distressed Emily. "Why, some day, Aunt Laura, I'll write real books, and make lots of money," she added, sensing that the business-like Murrays measured the nature of most things on a cash basis. Aunt Laura smiled indulgently. "I'm afraid you'll never grow rich that way, dear. It would be wiser to employ your time preparing yourself for some useful work. It was maddening to be condescended to like this, maddening that nobody could see that she had to write, maddening to have Aunt Laura so sweet and loving and stupid about it. Oh, thought Emily bitterly, if that hateful Enterprise editor had printed my piece they'd have believed then. At any rate, advised Aunt Laura, don't let Elizabeth see you writing them. But somehow Emily could not take this prudent advice. There had been occasions when she had connived with Aunt Laura to hoodwink Aunt Elizabeth on some little matter, but she found she could not do it in this. This had to be open and above board. She must write stories, and Aunt Elizabeth must know it. That was the way it had to be. She could not be false to herself in this. She could not pretend to be false. She wrote her father all about it, poured out her bitterness and perplexity to him in what, though she did not suspect it at the time, was the last letter she was to write him. There was a large bundle of letters by now on the old sofa shelf in the garret, for Emily had written many letters to her father besides those which have been chronicled in this history. There were a great many paragraphs about Aunt Elizabeth in them, most of them very uncomplimentary, and some of them, as Emily herself would have owned when her first bitterness was past, overdrawn and exaggerated. They had been written in moments when her hurt and angry soul demanded some outlet for its emotion, and barbed her pen with venom. Emily was mistress of a subtly malicious style when she chose to be. After she had written them, the hurt had ceased, and she thought no more about them. But they remained. And one spring day, Aunt Elizabeth, house cleaning in the garret, while Emily played happily with Teddy at the tansy patch, found the bundle of letters on the sofa shelf, sat down, and read them all. Elizabeth Murray would never have read any writing belonging to a grown person, but it never occurred to her that there was anything dishonorable in reading the letters wherein Emily, lonely and sometimes misunderstood, had poured out her heart to the father she had loved and been loved by so passionately and understandingly. Aunt Elizabeth thought she had a right to know everything that this pensioner on her bounty did, said, or thought. She read the letters, and she found out what Emily thought of her, Elizabeth Murray, autocrat, unchallenged, to whom no one had ever dared to say anything uncomplimentary. Such an experience is no pleasanter at 60 than at 16. As Elizabeth Murray folded up the last letter, her hands trembled with anger, and something underneath it that was not anger. "Emily, your Aunt Elizabeth wants to see you in the parlor," said Aunt Laura when Emily returned from the tansy patch, driven home by the thin grey rain that had begun to drift over the greening fields. Her tone, her sorrowful look, warned Emily that mischief was in the wind. Emily had no idea what mischief. She could not recall anything she had done recently that should bring her up before the tribunal Aunt Elizabeth occasionally held in the parlor. It must be serious when it was in the parlor. For reasons best known to herself, Aunt Elizabeth held super-serious interviews like this in the parlor. Possibly it was because she felt obscurely that the photographs of the Murrays on the walls gave her a backing she needed when dealing with this hop out of kin. For the same reason Emily detested a trial in the parlor. She always felt on such occasions like a very small mouse surrounded by a circle of grim cats. Emily skipped across the big hall, pausing, in spite of her alarm, to glance at the charming red world through the crimson glass. then pushed open the parlour door. The room was dim, for only one of the slat blinds was partially raised. Aunt Elizabeth was sitting bolt upright in Grandfather Murray's black horsehair chair. Emily looked at her stern, angry face first, and then at her lap. Emily understood. The first thing she did was to retrieve her precious letters. With the quickness of light, she sprang to Aunt Elizabeth, snatched up the bundle, and retreated to the door. There she faced Aunt Elizabeth, her face blazing with indignation and outrage. Sacrilege had been committed. The most sacred shrine of her soul had been profaned. "How dare you?" she said. "How dare you touch my private papers, Aunt Elizabeth?" Aunt Elizabeth had not expected this. She had looked for confusion, dismay, shame, fear, for anything but this righteous indignation, as if she, forsooth, were the guilty one. She rose. "Give me those letters, Emily." "No, I will not," said Emily, white with anger, as she clasped her hands around the bundle. "They are mine and father's, not yours. You had no right to touch them. I will never forgive you." This was turning the tables with a vengeance. Aunt Elizabeth was so dumbfounded that she hardly knew what to say or do. Worst of all, a most unpleasant doubt of her own conduct suddenly assailed her, driven home, perhaps, by the intensity and earnestness of Emily's accusation. For the first time in her life it occurred to Elizabeth Murray to wonder if she had done rightly. For the first time in her life she felt ashamed, and the shame made her furious. It was intolerable that she should be made to feel ashamed. For the moment they faced each other, not as aunt and niece, not as child and adult, but as two human beings, each with hatred for the other in her heart. Elizabeth Murray, tall and austere and thin-lipped; Emily Starr, white of face, her eyes pools of black flame, her trembling arms hugging her letters. "So this is your gratitude," said Aunt Elizabeth. "You were a penniless orphan. I took you to my home. I have given you shelter, and food, and education, and kindness, and this is my thanks." As yet, Emily's tempest of anger and resentment prevented her from feeling the sting of this. "You did not want to take me," she said. "You made me draw lots, and you took me because the lot fell to you. You knew some of you had to take me because you were the proud Murrays and couldn't let a relation go to an orphan asylum. Aunt Laura loves me now, but you don't, so why should I love you? Ungrateful, thankless child." "I'm not thankless. I've tried to be good. I've tried to obey you and please you. I do all the chores I can to help pay for my keep, and you had no business to read my letters to father. They are disgraceful letters, and must be destroyed," said Aunt Elizabeth. "No!" Emily clasped them tighter. "I'd sooner burn myself. You shall not have them, Aunt Elizabeth." She felt her brows drawing together. She felt the Murray look on her face. She knew she was conquering. Elizabeth Murray turned paler, if that were possible. There were times when she could give the Murray look herself. It was not that which dismayed her. It was the uncanny something which seemed to peer out behind the Murray look that always broke her will. She trembled, faltered, yielded. "Keep your letters," she said bitterly, "and scorn the old woman who opened her home to you." She went out of the parlour. Emily was left mistress of the field, and all at once her victory turned to dust and ashes in her mouth. She went up to her own room, hid her letters in the cupboard over the mantel, and then crept up on her bed, huddling down in a little heap, with her face buried in her pillow. She was still sore with a sense of outrage, but underneath another pain was beginning to ache terribly. Something in her was hurt because she had hurt Aunt Elizabeth, for she felt that Aunt Elizabeth, under all her anger, was hurt. This surprised Emily. She would have expected Aunt Elizabeth to be angry, of course, but she would never have supposed it would affect her in any other way. Yet she had seen something in Aunt Elizabeth's eyes when she had flung that last stinging sentence at her, something that spoke of bitter hurt. "Oh, oh!" gasped Emily. She began to cry chokingly into her pillow. She was so wretched that she could not get out of herself, and watch her own suffering with a sort of enjoyment in its drama, set her mind to analyze her feelings. And when Emily was as wretched as that, she was very wretched indeed, and wholly comfortless. Aunt Elizabeth would not keep her at New Moon after a poisonous quarrel like this. She would send her away, of course. Emily believed this. Nothing was too horrible to believe just then. How could she live away from dear New Moon? And I may have to live 80 years, Emily moaned. But worse even than this was the remembrance of that look in Aunt Elizabeth's eyes. Her own sense of outrage and sacrilege ebbed away under the remembrance. She thought of all the things she had written her father about Aunt Elizabeth. Sharp, bitter things, some of them just, some of them unjust. She began to feel that she should not have written them. It was true enough that Aunt Elizabeth had not loved her, had not wanted to take her to New Moon. But she had taken her, and though it had been done in duty, not in love, the fact remained. It was no use for her to tell herself that it wasn't as if the letters were written to any one living, to be seen and read by others. While she was under Aunt Elizabeth's roof, while she owed the food she ate and the clothes she wore to Aunt Elizabeth, she should not say, even to her father, harsh things of her. A star should not have done it. I must go and ask Aunt Elizabeth to forgive me, thought Emily at last. All the passion gone out of her, and only regret and repentance left. I suppose she never will. She'll hate me always now. But I must go. She turned herself about, and then the door opened, and Aunt Elizabeth entered. She came across the room, and stood at the side of the bed, looking down at the grieved little face on the pillow, a face that in the dim, rainy twilight, with its tear stains and black shadowed eyes, looked strangely mature and chiselled. Elizabeth Murray was still austere and cold. Her voice sounded stern, but she said an amazing thing. "Emily, I had no right to read your letters. I admit I was wrong. Will you forgive me?" Oh! The word was almost a cry. Aunt Elizabeth had at last discerned the way to conquer Emily. The latter lifted herself up, flung her arms about Aunt Elizabeth, and said chokingly, "Oh, Aunt Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have written those things, but I wrote them when I was vexed, and I didn't mean them all. Truly, I didn't mean the worst of them. Oh, you'll believe that, won't you, Aunt Elizabeth? I'd like to believe it, Emily. An odd quiver passed through the tall, rigid form. I don't like to think you hate me. My sister's child, little Juliet's child. I don't. Oh, I don't, sobbed Emily. And I'll love you, Aunt Elizabeth, if you'll let me, if you want me to. I didn't think you cared, dear Aunt Elizabeth. Emily gave Aunt Elizabeth a fierce hug and a passionate kiss on the white, fine wrinkled cheek. Aunt Elizabeth kissed her gravely on the brow in return, and then said, as if closing the door on the whole incident, "You'd better wash your face and come down to supper." But there was yet something to be cleared up. "Aunt Elizabeth," whispered Emily, "I can't burn those letters, you know. They belong to father. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll go over them all, and put a star by anything I said about you, and then I'll add an explanatory footnote, saying that I was mistaken." Emily spent her spare time for several days putting in her explanatory footnotes, and then her conscience had rest. But when she again tried to write a letter to her father, she found that it no longer meant anything to her. The sense of reality, nearness, of close communion had gone. Perhaps she had been outgrowing it gradually, as childhood began to merge into girlhood. Perhaps the bitter scene with Aunt Elizabeth had only shaken into dust something out of which the spirit had already departed. But whatever the explanation, it was not possible to write such letters any more. She missed them terribly, but she could not go back to them. A certain door of life was shut behind her and could not be reopened. End of section 32. Recording by Leanne Fortune.
Section 33 of Emily of New Moon by Lucy M. Montgomery. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 33. It would be pleasant to be able to record that after the reconciliation in the Lookout, Emily and Aunt Elizabeth lived in entire amity and harmony. But the truth was that things went on pretty much the same as before. Emily went softly and tried to mingle serpent's wisdom and dove's harmlessness in practical proportions, but their points of view were so different that there were bound to be clashes. They did not speak the same language, so there was bound to be misunderstanding. And yet there was a difference, a very vital difference. Elizabeth Murray had learned an important lesson, that there was not one law of fairness for children and another for grown-ups. She continued to be as autocratic as ever, but she did not do or say to Emily anything she would not have done or said to Laura, had occasion called for it. Emily, on her side, had discovered the fact that, under all her surface coldness and sternness, Aunt Elizabeth really had an affection for her, and it was wonderful what a difference this made. It took the sting out of Aunt Elizabeth's ways and words, and healed entirely a certain little half-conscious sore spot that had been in Emily's heart ever since the incident of the drawn slips at Maywood. "I don't believe I'm a duty to Aunt Elizabeth any more," she thought exultantly. Emily grew rapidly that summer, in body, mind, and soul. Life was delightful, growing richer every hour like an unfolding rose. Forms of beauty filled her imagination and were transferred as best she could to paper, though they were never so lovely there. And Emily had the heart-breaking moments of the true artist who discovers that Never on painter's canvas lives the charm of his fancy's dream. Much of her old stuff she burned. Even The Child of the Sea was reduced to ashes. But the little pile of manuscripts in the mantel cupboard of the lookout was growing steadily larger. Emily kept her scribblings there now. The sofa shelf in the garret was desecrated, and besides, she felt somehow that Aunt Elizabeth would never meddle with her private papers again, no matter where they were kept. She did not go now to the garret to read or write or dream. Her own dear lookout was the best place for that. She loved that quaint little old room intensely. It was almost like a living thing to her, a sharer in gladness, a comforter in sorrow. Ilse was growing too, blossoming out into strange beauty and brilliance, knowing no law but her own pleasure, recognizing no authority but her own whim. Aunt Laura worried over her. She will be a woman so soon, and who will look after her? Alan won't. I've no patience with Alan, said Aunt Elizabeth grimly. He is always ready to hector and advise other people. He'd better look at home. He'll come over here and order me to do this or that, or not to do it, for Emily. But if I say one word to him about Ilse, he blows the roof off. The idea of a man turning against his daughter and neglecting her as he has neglected Ilse, simply because her mother wasn't all she ought to be, as if the poor child was to blame for that. Shh, said Aunt Laura, as Emily crossed the sitting room on her way upstairs. Emily smiled sadly to herself. Aunt Laura needn't be shing. There was nothing left for her to find out about Ilse's mother. Nothing, except the most important thing of all, which neither she nor anybody else living knew. For Emily had never surrendered her conviction that the whole truth about Beatrice Burnley was not known. She often worried about it when she lay curled up in her black walnut bed o' nights, listening to the moan of the Gulf and the windwomen singing in the trees, and drifted into sleep, wishing intensely that she could solve the dark old mystery and dissolve its legend of shame and bitterness. Emily went rather languidly upstairs to the lookout. She meant to write some more of her story, The Ghost of the Well, wherein she was weaving the old legend of the well in the Lee field, but somehow interest was lacking. She put the manuscript back into the mantel cupboard. She read over a letter from Dean Priest which had come that day, one of his fat, jolly, whimsical, delightful letters, wherein he had told her that he was coming to stay a month with his sister at Blairwater. She wondered why this announcement did not excite her more. She was tired. Her head was aching. Emily couldn't remember ever having had a headache before. Since she could not write, she decided to lie down and be Lady Trevanion for a while. Emily was Lady Trevanion very often that summer, in one of the dream lives she had begun to build up for herself. Lady Trevanion was the wife of an English earl, and, besides being a famous novelist, was a member of the British House of Commons, where she always appeared in black velvet, with a stately coronet of pearls on her dark hair. She was the only woman in the house, and, as this was before the days of the suffragettes, she had to endure many sneers and innuendos and insults from the ungallant males around her. Emily's favorite dream scene was where she rose to make her first speech, a wonderfully thrilling event. As Emily found it difficult to do justice to the scene in any ideas of her own, she always fell back on Pitt's reply to Walpole, which she had found in her Royal Reader, and declaimed it with suitable variations. The insolent speaker who had provoked Lady Trevanion into speech had sneered at her as a woman, and Lady Trevanion, a magnificent creature in her velvet and pearls, rose to her feet amid hushed and dramatic silence, and said, "The atrocious crime of being a woman, which the honourable member has, with such spirit and decency, charged upon me, I shall attempt neither to palliate nor deny, but shall content myself with wishing that I may be one of those whose follies cease with their sex, and not one of that number who are ignorant in spite of manhood and experience." Here she was always interrupted by thunders of applause. But the savour was entirely lacking in this scene to-day, and by the time Emily had reached the line, "But womanhood, sir, is not my only crime," she gave up in disgust, and fell to worrying over Ilse's mother again, mixed up with some uneasy speculations regarding the climax of her story about the ghost of the will, mingled with her unpleasant physical sensations. Her eyes hurt her when she moved them. She was chilly, although the July day was hot. She was still lying there when Aunt Elizabeth came up to ask why she hadn't gone to bring the cows home from the pasture. I didn't know it was so late," said Emily, confusedly. My head aches, Aunt Elizabeth." Aunt Elizabeth rolled up the white cotton blind and looked at Emily. She noted her flushed face, she felt her pulse. Then she bade her shortly to stay where she was, went down, and sent Perry for Dr. Burnley. "Probably she's got the measles," said the doctor as gruffly as usual. Emily was not yet sick enough to be gentle over. "There's an outbreak of them at Dairy Pond. Has she had any chance to catch them? Jimmy Joe Bell's 2 children were here one afternoon about 10 days ago. She played with them. She's always playing round with people she's no business to associate with. I haven't heard that they were or have been sick, though." Jimmy Joe Bell, when asked plainly, confessed that his young ones had come out with measles the very day after they had been at New Moon. There was therefore not much doubt as to Emily's malady. "It's a bad kind of measles, apparently," the doctor said. "Quite a number of the Dairy Pond children have died of it, mostly French, though. The kids would be out of bed when they had no business to be, and caught cold. I don't think you need worry about Emily. She might as well have measles and be done with it. Keep her warm and keep the room dark. I'll run over in the morning." For 3 or 4 days nobody was much alarmed. Measles was a disease everybody had to have. Aunt Elizabeth looked after Emily well, and slept on a sofa which had been moved into the lookout. She even left the window open at night. In spite of this, perhaps Aunt Elizabeth thought because of it, Emily grew steadily sicker, and on the 5th day a sharp change for the worse took place. Her fever went up rapidly, delirium set in, Dr. Burnley came, looked anxious, scowled, changed the medicine. "I'm sent for to a bad case of pneumonia at White Cross," he said, "and I have to go to Charlottetown in the morning to be present at Mrs. Jackwell's operation. I promised her I would go. I'll be back in the evening. Emily is very restless. That high-strung system of hers is evidently very sensitive to fever. What's that nonsense she's talking about the wind woman?" "Oh, I don't know," said Aunt Elizabeth worriedly. "She's always talking nonsense like that, even when she's well. Ellen, tell me plainly, is there any danger?" "There's always danger in this type of measles. I don't like these symptoms. The eruption should be out by now, and there's no sign of it. Her fever is very high, but I don't think we need be alarmed yet. If I thought otherwise, I wouldn't go to town. Keep her as quiet as possible. Humor her whims if you can. I don't like that mental disturbance. She looks terribly distressed. Seems to be worrying over something. Has she had anything on her mind of late?" "Not that I know of," said Aunt Elizabeth. She had a sudden bitter realization that she really did not know much about the child's mind. Emily would never have come to her with any of her little troubles and worries. "Emily, what is bothering you?" asked Dr. Burnley, softly, very softly. He took the hot, tossing little hand gently, oh, so gently, in his big one. Emily looked up with wild, fever-bright eyes. "She couldn't have done it! She couldn't have done it!" "Of course she couldn't," said the doctor cheerily. "Don't worry, she didn't do it." His eyes telegraphed, "What does she mean?" to Elizabeth, but Elizabeth shook her head. "Who are you talking about, dear?" she asked Emily. It was the first time she had called Emily dear. But Emily was off on another tack. The well in Mr. Lee's field was open, she declared. Someone would be sure to fall into it. Why didn't Mr. Lee shut it up? Dr. Burnley left Aunt Elizabeth trying to reassure Emily on that point, and hurried away to White Cross. At the door he nearly fell over Perry, who was curled up on the sandstone slab, hugging his sunburned legs desperately. "How is Emily?" he demanded, grasping the skirt of the doctor's coat. "Don't bother me. I'm in a hurry," growled the doctor. "You tell me how Emily is, or I'll hang on to your coat till the seams go," said Perry stubbornly. "I can't get one word of sense out of them old maids. You tell me." "She's a sick child, but I'm not seriously alarmed about her yet." The doctor gave his coat another tug, but Perry held on for a last word. "You've got to cure her," he said. "If anything happens to Emily, I'll drown myself in the pond. Mind that." He let go so suddenly that Dr. Burnley nearly went headlong on the ground. Then Perry curled up on the doorstep again. He watched there until Laura and Cousin Jimmy had gone to bed, and then he sneaked through the house and sat on the stairs, where he could hear any sound in Emily's room. He sat there all night, with his fists clenched, as if keeping guard against an unseen foe. Elizabeth Murray watched by Emily until 2 o'clock, and then Laura took her place. "She has raved a great deal," said Aunt Elizabeth. "I wish I knew what is worrying her. There is something, I feel sure. It isn't all mere delirium. She keeps repeating she couldn't have done it, in such imploring tones. I wonder Oh, Laura, you remember the time I read her letters. Do you think she means me?" Laura shook her head. She had never seen Elizabeth so moved. "If the child doesn't get better," said Aunt Elizabeth. She said no more, but went quickly out of the room. Laura sat down by the bed. She was pale and drawn with her own worry and fatigue, for she had not been able to sleep. She loved Emily as her own child, and the awful dread that had possessed her heart would not lift for an instant. She sat there and prayed mutely. Emily fell into a troubled slumber, which lasted until the grey dawn crept into the lookout. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Aunt Laura, looked through her, looked beyond her. "I see her coming over the fields," she said in a high, clear voice. "She is coming so gladly. She is singing. She is thinking of her baby. Oh, keep her back, keep her back. She doesn't see the well. It's so dark she doesn't see it. Oh, she's gone into it. She's gone into it." Emily's voice rose in a piercing shriek which penetrated to Aunt Elizabeth's room and brought her flying across the hall in her flannel nightgown. "What is wrong, Laura?" she gasped. Laura was trying to soothe Emily, who was struggling to sit up in bed. Her cheeks were crimson, and her eyes had still the same far, wild look. "Emily, Emily, darling, you've just had a bad dream. The old Lee well isn't open. Nobody has fallen into it." "Yes, somebody has," said Emily shrilly. "She has. I saw her, with the ace of hearts on her forehead. Do you think I don't know her?" She fell back on her pillow, moaned, and tossed the hands which Laura Murray had loosened in her surprise. The two ladies of New Moon looked at each other across her bed in dismay, and something like terror. "Who did you see, Emily?" asked Aunt Elizabeth. "Ilse's mother, of course. I always knew she didn't do that dreadful thing. She fell into the old well. She's there now. Go and get her out, Aunt Laura, please." "Yes, yes, of course we'll get her out, darling," said Aunt Laura soothingly. Emily sat up in bed and looked at Aunt Laura again. This time she did not look through her. She looked into her. Laura Murray felt that those burning eyes read her soul. "You are lying to me," cried Emily. "You don't mean to try to get her out. You are only saying it to put me off. Aunt Elizabeth," she suddenly turned and caught Aunt Elizabeth's hand, "you'll do it for me, won't you? You'll go and get her out of the old well, won't you?" Elizabeth remembered that Dr. Burnley had said that Emily's whims must be humoured. She was terrified by the child's condition. "Yes, I'll get her out if she is in there," she said. Emily released her hand and sank down. The wild glare left her eyes. A great sudden calm fell over her anguished little face. "I know you'll keep your word," she said. "You are very hard, but you never lie, Aunt Elizabeth." Elizabeth Murray went back to her own room and dressed herself with her shaking fingers. A little later, when Emily had fallen into a quiet sleep, Laura went downstairs and heard Elizabeth giving Cousin Jimmy some orders in the kitchen. "Elizabeth, you don't really mean to have that old well searched?" "I do," said Elizabeth resolutely. "I know it's nonsense as well as you do, but I had to promise it to quiet her down, and I'll keep my promise. You heard what she said. She believed I wouldn't lie to her. Nor will I. Jimmy, you will go over to James Lee's after breakfast and ask him to come here." "How has she heard the story?" said Laura. "I don't know. Oh, someone has told her, of course. Perhaps that old demon of the Nancy priest. It doesn't matter who. She has heard it, and the thing is to keep her quiet. It isn't so much of a job to put ladders in the well and get someone to go down it. The thing that matters is the absurdity of it." "We'll be laughed at for a pair of fools," protested Laura, whose share of Murray pride was in hot revolt. "And besides, it will open up all the old scandal again." "No matter. I'll keep my word to the child," said Elizabeth stubbornly. Alan Burnley came to New Moon at sunset, on his way home from town. He was tired, for he had been going night and day for over a week. He was more worried than he had admitted over Emily. He looked old and rather desolate as he stepped into the New Moon kitchen. Only Cousin Jimmy was there. Cousin Jimmy did not seem to have much to do, although it was a good hay day, and Jimmy Joe, Belle, and Perry were hauling in the great fragrant sun-dried loads. He sat by the western window with a strange expression on his face. "Hello, Jimmy. Where are the girls, and how is Emily?" "Emily is better," said Cousin Jimmy. "The rash is out and her fever has gone down. I think she's asleep." "Good. We couldn't afford to lose that little girl, could we, Jimmy?" "No," said Jimmy, but he did not seem to want to talk about it. "Laura and Elizabeth are in the sitting room. They want to see you." He paused a minute and then added in an eerie way, "There is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed." It occurred to Alan Burnley that Jimmy was acting mysteriously, and if Laura and Elizabeth wanted to see him, why didn't they come out? It wasn't like them to stand on ceremony in this fashion. He pushed open the sitting-room door impatiently. Laura Murray was sitting on the sofa, leaning her head on its arm. He could not see her face, but he felt that she was crying. Elizabeth was sitting bolt upright on a chair. She wore her second-best black silk and her second-best lace cap. and she, too, had been crying. Dr. Burnley never attached much importance to Laura's tears, easy as those of most women, but that Elizabeth Murray should cry! Had he ever seen her cry before? The thought of Ilse flashed into his mind, his little neglected daughter. Had anything happened to Ilse? In one dreadful moment Alan Burnley paid the price of his treatment of his child. "What is wrong?" he exclaimed in his gruffest manner. "Oh, Alan," said Elizabeth Murray, "God forgive us, God forgive us all! It is Ilse," said Dr. Burnley dully. "No, no, not Ilse." Then she told him. She told him what had been found at the bottom of the old Lee well. She told him what had been the real fate of the lovely, laughing young wife whose name for 12 bitter years had never crossed his lips. It was not until the next evening that Emily saw the doctor. She was lying in bed, weak and limp, red as a beet with the measles rash, but quite herself again. Alan Burnley stood by the bed and looked down at her. "Emily, dear little child, do you know what you have done for me? God knows how you did it." "I thought you didn't believe in God," said Emily wonderingly. "You have given me back my faith in Him, Emily." "Why, what have I done?" Dr. Burnley saw that she had no remembrance of her delirium. Laura had told him that she had slept long and soundly after Elizabeth's promise, and had awakened with fever gone and the eruption fast coming out. She had asked nothing, and they had said nothing. "When you are better, we will tell you all," he said, smiling down at her. There was something very sorrowful in the smile, and yet something very sweet. "He is smiling with his eyes as well as his mouth now," thought Emily. How did she know?" whispered Laura Murray to him when he went down. "I can't understand it, Alan." "Nor I. These things are beyond us, Laura," he answered gravely. "I only know this child has given Beatrice back to me, stainless and beloved. It can be explained rationally enough, perhaps. Emily has evidently been told about Beatrice, and worried over it. Her repeated 'she couldn't have done it' shows that. And the tales of the old Lee well naturally made a deep impression on the mind of a sensitive child, keenly alive to dramatic values. In her delirium, she mixed this all up with the well-known fact of Jimmy's tumble into the New Moon well, and the rest was coincidence. I would have explained it all so myself once, but now, Laura, I only say humbly, a little child shall lead them." "Our stepmother's mother was a Highland Scotch woman. They said she had the second sight," said Elizabeth. "I never believed in it before." The excitement of Blairwater had died away before Emily was deemed strong enough to hear the story. That which had been found in the old Lee well had been buried in the Mitchell plot at Shrewsbury, and a white marble shaft, sacred to the memory of Beatrice Burnley, beloved wife of Alan Burnley, had been erected. The sensation caused by Dr. Burnley's presence every Sunday in the old Burnley pew had died away. On the first evening that Emily was allowed to sit up, Aunt Laura told her the whole story. Her manner of telling stripped it forever of the taint and innuendo left by Aunt Nancy. "I knew Ilse's mother couldn't have done it," said Emily triumphantly. "We blame ourselves now for our lack of faith," said Aunt Laura. "We should have known too, but it did seem black against her at the time, Emily. She was a bright, beautiful, merry creature. We thought her close friendship with her cousin natural and harmless. We know now it was so,
But all these years since her disappearance we have believed differently. Mr. James Lee remembers clearly that the well was open the night of Beatrice's disappearance. His hired man had taken the old rotten planks off it that evening, intending to put the new ones on at once. Then Robert Grierson's house caught fire, and he ran with everybody else to help save it. By the time it was out, it was too dark to finish with the well, and the man said nothing about it until the morning. Mr. Lee was angry with him. He said it was a scandalous thing to leave a well uncovered like that. He went right down and put the new planks in place himself. He did not look down in the well. Had he looked, he could have seen nothing, for the ferns growing out from the sides screened the depths. It was just after harvest. No one was in the field again before the next spring. He never connected Beatrice's disappearance with the open well. He wonders now that he didn't. But you see, dear, there had been much malicious gossip, and Beatrice was known to have gone on board the Lady of Winds. It was taken for granted she never came off again, but she did, and went to her death in the old Lee field. It was a dreadful ending to her bright young life, but not so dreadful, after all, as what we believed. For 12 years we have wronged the dead. But, Emily, how could you know? I don't know. When the doctor came in that day, I couldn't remember anything, but now it seems to me that I remember something, just as if I dreamed it, of seeing Ilse's mother coming over the fields, singing. It was dark, and yet I could see the Ace of Hearts. Oh, Auntie, I don't know. I don't like to think of it, some way. We won't talk of it again, said Aunt Laura gently. It is one of the things best not talked of, one of God's secrets. And Ilse, does her father love her now? Asked Emily eagerly. Love her? He can't love her enough. It seems as if he were pouring out on her at once all the shut-up love of those 12 years. He'll likely spoil her now as much with indulgence as he did before with neglect, said Elizabeth, coming in with Emily's supper in time to hear Laura's reply. It will take a lot of love to spoil Ilse, laughed Laura. She is drinking it up like a thirsty sponge, and she loves him wildly in return. There isn't a trace of grudge in her over his long neglect. All the same, said Elizabeth grimly, tucking pillows behind Emily's back with a very gentle hand, oddly in contrast with her severe expression. He won't get off so easily. Ilse has run wild for 12 years. He won't find it so easy to make her behave properly now, if he ever does. Love will do wonders, said Aunt Laura softly. Of course, Ilse is dying to come and see you, Emily, but she must wait until there is no danger of infection. I told her she might write, but when she found I would have to read it because of your eyes, she said she'd wait till you could read it yourself. Evidently, Laura laughed again, evidently Ilse has much of importance to tell you. I didn't know anybody could be as happy as I am now, said Emily. And oh, Aunt Elizabeth, it is so nice to feel hungry again and to have something to chew. End of section 33. Recording by Leanne Fortune.
Section 34 of Emily of New Moon by Lucy M. Montgomery. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 34. Emily's convalescence was rather slow. Physically, she recovered with normal celerity, but a certain spiritual and emotional languor persisted for a time. One cannot go down to the depths of hidden things and escape the penalty. Aunt Elizabeth said she moped, but Emily was too happy and contented to mope. It was just that life seemed to have lost its savour for a time, as if some spring of vital energy had been drained out of it and refilled slowly. She had, just then, no one to play with. Perry, Ilse, and Teddy had all come down with measles the same day. Mrs. Kent at first declared bitterly that Teddy had caught them at New Moon, but all three had contracted them at a Sunday school picnic where Dairy Pond children had been. That picnic infected all Blairwater. There was a perfect orgy of measles. Teddy and Ilse were only moderately ill, but Perry, who had insisted on going home to Aunt Tom at the first symptoms, nearly died. Emily was not allowed to know his danger until it had passed, lest it worry her too much. Even Aunt Elizabeth worried over it. She was surprised to discover how much they missed Perry round the place. It was fortunate for Emily that Dean Priest was in Blairwater during this forlorn time. His companionship was just what she needed, and helped her wonderfully on the road to complete recovery. They went for long walks together all over Blairwater, with Tweed woofing around them, and explored places and roads Emily had never seen before. They watched a young moon grow old, night by night. They talked in dim, scented chambers of twilight, over long red roads of mystery. They followed the lure of hill winds. They saw the stars rise, and Dean told her all about them, the great constellations of the old myths. It was a wonderful month, but on the first day of Teddy's convalescence, Emily was off to the tansy patch for the afternoon, and Jarback Priest walked, if he walked at all, alone. Aunt Elizabeth was extremely polite to him, though she did not like the priests of Priest Pond overmuch, and never felt quite comfortable under the mocking gleam of Jarback's green eyes, and the faint derision of his smile, which seemed to make Murray pride and Murray traditions seem much less important than they really were. "He has the priest flavour," she told Laura, "though it isn't as strong in him as in most of them, and he's certainly helping Emily. She has begun to spunk up since he came." Emily continued to spunk up, and by September, when the measles epidemic was spent, and Dean Priest had gone on one of his sudden swoops over to Europe for the autumn, she was ready for school again, a little taller, a little thinner, a little less childlike, with great grey shadowy eyes that had looked into death and read the riddle of a buried thing, and henceforth would hold in them some haunting, elusive remembrance of that world behind the veil. Dean Priest had seen it. Mr. Carpenter saw it when she smiled at him across her desk at school. "She's left the childhood of her soul behind, though she is still a child in body," he muttered. One afternoon, amid the golden days and hazes of October, he asked her gruffly to let him see some of her verses. "I never meant to encourage you in it," he said. "I don't mean it now. Probably you can't write a line of real poetry and never will, but let me see your stuff. If it's hopelessly bad, I'll tell you so. I won't have you wasting years striving for the unattainable. At least I won't have it on my conscience if you do. If there's any promise in it, I'll tell you so just as honestly, and bring some of your stories too. They're trash yet, that's certain, but I'll see if they show just and sufficient cause for going on." Emily spent a very solemn hour that evening, weighing, choosing, rejecting. To the little bundle of verse she added one of her Jimmy books which contained, as she thought, her best stories. She went to school next day, so secret and mysterious that Ilse took offense, started in to call her names, and then stopped. Ilse had promised her father that she would try to break herself of the habit of calling names. She was making fairly good headway, and her conversation, if less vivid, was beginning to approximate to New Moon standards. Emily made a sad mess of her lessons that day. She was nervous and frightened. She had a tremendous respect for Mr. Carpenter's opinion. Father Cassidy had told her to keep on. Dean Priest had told her that some day she might really write. But perhaps they were only trying to be encouraging because they liked her and didn't want to hurt her feelings. Emily knew Mr. Carpenter would not do this. No matter if he did like her, he would nip her aspirations mercilessly if he thought the root of the matter was not in her. If, on the contrary, he bade her Godspeed, she would rest content with that against the world and never lose heart in the face of any future criticism. No wonder the days seemed fraught with tremendous issues to Emily. When school was out, Mr. Carpenter asked her to remain. She was so white and tense that the other pupils thought she must have been found out by Mr. Carpenter in some especially dreadful behavior, and knew she was going to catch it. Rhoda Stewart flung her a significantly malicious smile from the porch, which Emily never even saw. She was, indeed, at a momentous bar, with Mr. Carpenter as supreme judge, and her whole future career, so she believed, hanging on his verdict. The pupils disappeared, and a mellow, sunshiny stillness settled over the old schoolroom. Mr. Carpenter took the little packet she had given him in the morning out of his desk, came down the aisle, and sat in the seat before her, facing her. Very deliberately he settled his glasses astride his hooked nose, took out her manuscripts, and began to read, or rather to glance over them, flinging scraps of comments, mingled with grunts, sniffs, and hoots, at her as he glanced. Emily folded her cold hands on her desk, and braced her feet against the legs of it to keep her knees from trembling. This was a very terrible experience. She wished she had never given her verses to Mr. Carpenter. They were no good. Of course they were no good. Remember the editor of the Enterprise. "Humph!" said Mr. Carpenter. "Sunset! Lord, how many poems have been written on sunset? The clouds are massed in splendid state at heaven's unbarred western gate, where troops of star-eyed spirits wait." "By gad, what does that mean?" I don't know," faltered startled Emily, whose wits had been scattered by the sudden swoop of his spiked glance. Mr. Carpenter snorted. "For heaven's sake, girl, don't write what you can't understand yourself. And this, to life. Life as thy gift I ask no rainbow joy. Is that sincere? Is it, girl? Stop and think. Do you ask? Do you ask? No rainbow joy of life?" He transfixed her with another glare, but Emily was beginning to pick herself up a bit. Nevertheless, she suddenly felt oddly ashamed of the very elevated and unselfish desires expressed in that sonnet. "No," she answered reluctantly, "I do want rainbow joy. Lots of it. Of course you do. We all do. We don't get it. You won't get it. But don't be hypocrite enough to pretend you don't want it, even in a sonnet. Lines to a mountain cascade. On its dark rocks like the whiteness of a veil around a bride. Where did you see a mountain cascade in Prince Edward Island? Nowhere. There's a picture of one in Dr. Burnley's library. A wood stream. The threading sunbeams quiver, the bending bushes shiver. O'er the little shadowy river. There's only one more rhyme that occurs to me, and that's liver. Why did you leave it out?" Emily writhed. Wind song. I have shaken the dew in the meadows from the clover's creamy gown. Pretty, but weak. June! June! For heaven's sake, girl, don't write poetry on June. It's the sickliest subject in the world. It's been written to death. No, June is immortal, cried Emily, suddenly a mutinous sparkle replacing the strained look in her eyes. She was not going to let Mr. Carpenter have it all his own way. But Mr. Carpenter had tossed June aside without reading a line of it. I weary of the hungry world. What do you know of the hungry world? You, in your new moon seclusion of old trees and old maids. But it is hungry. Ode to winter. The seasons are a sort of disease all young poets must have, it seems. Ha! Spring will not forget. That's a good line. The only good line in it. Wanderings. I've learned the secret of the rune that the sombre pines on the hillside croon. Have you? Have you learned that secret? I think I've always known it, said Emily dreamily. That flash of unimaginable sweetness that sometimes surprised her had just come and gone. Aim and endeavour. Too didactic, too didactic. You've no right to try to teach until you're old, and then you won't want to. Her face was like a star, all pale and fair. Were you looking in the glass when you composed that line? No, indignantly. When the morning light is shaken like a banner on the hill. A good line, a good line. Oh, on such a golden morning to be living is delight. Too much like a faint echo of Wordsworth. The sea in September, blue and austerely bright. Austerely bright. Child, how can you marry the right adjectives like that? Morning, all secret fears that haunt the night. What do you know of the fears that haunt the night? I know something, said Emily decidedly, remembering her first night at Wither Grange. To a dead day, with the chilly calm on her brow, that only the dead may wear. Have you ever seen the chilly calm on the brow of the dead, Emily? Yes, said Emily softly, recalling that grey dawn in the old house in the hollow. I thought so, otherwise you couldn't have written that. And even as it is, how old are you, Jade? 13, last May. Humph! Lines to Mrs. George Irving's infant son. You should study the art of titles, Emily. There's a fashion in them, as in everything else. Your titles are as out of date as the candles of new moon. Soundly he sleeps with his red lips pressed, like a beautiful blossom, close to her breast. The rest isn't worth reading. September! Is there a month you've missed? Windy meadows, harvest deep, good line. Blairwater by moonlight. Gossamer, Emily, nothing but gossamer. The garden of new moon. Beguiling laughter and old song of merry maids and men. Good line. I suppose new moon is full of ghosts. Death's fell minion well fulfilled its part. That might have passed in Addison's day, but not now, not now, Emily. Your azure dimples are the graves, where million-buried sunbeams play. Atrocious, girl, atrocious. Graves aren't playgrounds. How much would you play if you were buried? Emily writhed and blushed again. Why couldn't she have seen that herself? Any goose could have seen it. Sail onward, ships, white wings, sail on, till past the horizon's purple bar you drift from sight. In flush of dawn, sail on, and 'neath the evening star. Trash, trash, and yet there's a picture in it. Lap softly, purple waves, I dream, and dreams are sweet. I'll wake no more. Ah, but you'll have to wake if you want to accomplish anything. Girl, you've used purple twice in the same poem. Buttercups in a golden frenzy. A golden frenzy. Girl, I see the wind shaking the buttercups. From the purple gates of the west I come. You're too fond of purple, Emily. It's such a lovely word, said Emily. Dreams that seem too bright to die. Seem, but never are. Emily, the luring voice of the echo of fame. So you've heard it too. It is a lure, and for most of us only an echo, and that's the last of the lot. Mr. Carpenter swept the little sheets aside, folded his arms on the desk, and looked over his glasses at Emily. Emily looked back at him mutely, nervously. All the life seemed to have been drained out of her body and concentrated in her eyes. 10 good lines out of 400, Emily. Comparatively good, that is. And all the rest balderdash, balderdash, Emily. I suppose so, said Emily faintly. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Her lips quivered. She could not help it. Pride was hopelessly submerged in the bitterness of her disappointment. She felt exactly like a candle that somebody had blown out. "What are you crying for?" demanded Mr. Carpenter. Emily blinked away the tears and tried to laugh. I'm sorry. You think it's no good," she said. Mr. Carpenter gave the desk a mighty thump. "No good? Didn't I tell you there were 10 good lines? Jade, for 10 righteous men Sodom had been spared. Do you mean that, after all?" The candle was being relighted again. "Of course I mean. If at 13 you can write 10 good lines, at 20 you'll write 10 times 10, if the gods are kind. Stop messing over months, though, and don't imagine you're a genius either, if you have written 10 decent lines. I think there's something trying to speak through you, but you'll have to make yourself a fit instrument for it. You've got to work hard and sacrifice. By gad, girl, you've chosen a jealous goddess, and she never lets her votaries go, not even when she shuts her ears forever to their plea. What have you there?" Emily, her heart thrilling, handed him her Jimmy book. She was so happy that it shone through her whole being with a positive radiance. She saw her future. Wonderful! Brilliant! Oh, her goddess would listen to her. Emily B. Starr, the distinguished poet. E. Bird Starr, the rising young novelist. She was recalled from her enchanting reverie by a chuckle from Mr. Carpenter. Emily wondered a little uneasily what he was laughing at. She didn't think there was anything funny in that book. It contained only 3 or 4 of her latest stories: The Butterfly Queen, a little fairy tale; The Disappointed House, wherein she had woven a pretty dream of hopes come true after long years; The Secret of the Glen, which, in spite of its title, was a fanciful little dialogue between the spirit of the snow, the spirit of the grey rain, the spirit of mist, and the spirit of moonshine. "So you think I am not beautiful when I say my prayers?" said Mr. Carpenter. Emily gasped, realized what had happened, made a frantic grab at her Jimmy book, missed it. Mr. Carpenter held it up beyond her reach and mocked at her. She had given him the wrong Jimmy book. And this one, oh horrors, what was in it, or rather what wasn't in it? Sketches of everyone in Blairwater, and a very full description of Mr. Carpenter himself. Intent on describing him exactly, she had been as mercilessly lucid as she always was, especially in regard to the odd faces he made on mornings when he opened the school day with a prayer. Thanks to her dramatic knack of word painting, Mr. Carpenter lived in that sketch. Emily did not know it, but he did. He saw himself as in a glass, and the artistry of it pleased him so that he cared for nothing else. Besides, she had drawn his good points quite as clearly as his bad ones. and there were some sentences in it. He looks as if he knew a great deal that can never be any use to him. I think he wears the black coat Mondays because it makes him feel that he hasn't been drunk at all. Who or what had taught the little jade these things? Oh, her goddess would not pass Emily by. "I'm sorry," said Emily, crimson with shame all over her dainty paleness. "Why, I wouldn't have missed this for all the poetry you've written or ever will write. By gad, it's literature, literature, and you're only 13. But you don't know what's ahead of you, the stony hills, the steep ascents, the buffets, the discouragements. Stay in the valley if you're wise. Emily, why do you want to write? Give me your reason." "I want to be famous and rich," said Emily coolly. "Everybody does. Is that all?" "No, I just love to write." "A better reason. But not enough, not enough. Tell me this. If you knew you would be poor as a church mouse all your life, if you knew you'd never have a line published, would you still go on writing? Would you?" "Of course I would," said Emily disdainfully. "Why, I have to write. I can't help it by times. I've just got to." "Oh, then I'd waste my breath giving advice at all. If it's in you to climb, you must. There are those who must lift their eyes to the hills. They can't breathe properly in the valleys. God help them if there's some weakness in them that prevents their climbing. You don't understand a word I'm saying yet. But go on. Climb. There. Take your book and go home. 30 years from now I will have a claim to distinction in the fact that Emily Bird Starr was once a pupil of mine. Go, go, before I remember what a disrespectful baggage you are to write such stuff about me, and be properly enraged." Emily went, still a bit scared, but oddly exultant, behind her fright. She was so happy that her happiness seemed to irradiate the world with its own splendor. All the sweet sounds of nature around her seemed like the broken words of her own delight. Mr. Carpenter watched her out of sight from the old worn threshold. "Wind and flame and sea," he muttered. "Nature is always taking us by surprise. This child has what I never had and would have made any sacrifice to have, but the gods don't allow us to be in their debt. She will pay for it. She will pay." At sunset Emily sat in the lookout room. It was flooded with soft splendor. Outside, in sky and trees, were delicate tintings and aerial sounds. Down in the garden, Daffy was chasing dead leaves along the red walks. The sight of his sleek striped sides, the grace of his movements, gave her pleasure, as did the beautiful, even glossy furrows of the ploughed fields beyond the lane, and the first faint white star in the crystal green sky. The wind of the autumn night was blowing trumpets of fairyland on the hills, and over in Lofty John's bush was laughter, like the laughter of fawns. Ilse and Perry and Teddy were waiting there for her. They had made a tryst for a twilight romp. She would go to them presently. Not yet. She was so full of rapture that she must write it out before she went back from her world of dreams to the world of reality. Once she would have poured it into a letter to her father. She could no longer do that. But on the table before her lay a brand new Jimmy book. She pulled it towards her, took up her pen, and on its first virgin page she wrote, "New moon, Blairwater, P.E. Island, October the 8th. I am going to write a diary, that it may be published when I die." End of section 34. Recording by Leanne Fortune. End of solo. Emily of New Moon by Lucy M. Montgomery.